together with the Africa Evidence Network members. So today we are here to this webinar titled EIDM Processes, Seeking Transformation for Improved Impacts. So I'm very excited with our amazing speakers that we are going to have today to look at this topic and interrogate it a bit more. So just to introduce myself, my name is Ziziwe. I am the director and the co-chair of the Africa Evidence Network. I have a smaller role today to just chair the session and make sure that we all are able to have a great conversation. I think just to help us to run the webinar properly and make things easier for all of us, I invite all of you to participate as much as possible to make sure that you contribute to the discussions. Also, just to let you know that we are recording this session because it's important that after this session, we're able to share the recording with people that did not attend or everyone that has attended as well. Maybe you might want to revisit these discussions, so you have the opportunity to do that through this recording process we are undertaking for this event. And we are going to ask everyone to have their cameras off just to save bandwidth so that those that are having slow connections can still be able to be part of this webinar and participate as much as they can. And we are going to also keep your mics off unless you are prompted or to switch it on by the facilitator. So that's to make sure that there's no noise in the recording for this webinar, to make sure that it's audible and is clear for people to understand and follow the discussions and the engagements. In case you are experiencing any technical difficulties during this webinar, please feel free to write on the chat box to Charity so that she can find ways to assist you so that you stay in the webinar. And also throughout this session, please feel free to use the chat box to engage. Please share your inputs, share your questions so that we keep the conversation going. So because towards the end, we'll make sure that your inputs or questions will be fed into the panel by the moderator. So just keep going if you have thoughts throughout this session. Engage in the chat box. I think it's important to just put this webinar into context. So this webinar is about the manifesto on capacity development that we've been building, I think, since 2020. So this manifesto was drafted by a working group that was put together for Evidence 2020 online. So it was an output for that particular event. So this manifesto is basically a declaration by all Africa's evidence ecosystem about the kind of capacity development we practice. And then secondly, it is an Africa-led approach to enhance capacities in EIDM in Africa. So we're excited about that. And also it serves as a resource and inspiration in the evidence ecosystem in the continent, just to make sure that we inspire ourselves and continuously see how best we develop capacities. And then finally, to challenge mainstream views on capacity development in Africa. So I think Charity will put the link for the manifesto on the chat so that in case you haven't seen this manifesto in this current form, you can be able to read through it. And as you engage with the webinar, if you have questions to put on the chat as well, please feel free to do so. So I think now the meat of the webinar is about to begin. So I'm going to hand over to Kirchuffs, who is a research team lead at PAX Africa, who has walked this journey with us to build this manifesto and guide this process over these years to moderate the sessions for us this afternoon. Over to you, Kirchuffs.
Thank you very much, Ziziwe, for the introduction and for taking up that role to chair the session. Good afternoon, good evening, if I may say, to everyone, depending on where you're coming from. It's a happy moment to have you join us again in this all-important journey of seeking to engage the manifesto for capacity development on EIDM on the continent. let me go straight to give some background to that. I think Siziwe has started that we developed the manifesto, I think in 2020, and then there had been some engagements post the launching of the manifesto. Some webinars had gone on, trying to generate some learning around the thematic areas of the manifesto and all that. So today's very topic is around the processes, right? It's themed EIDM processes, seeking transformation for improved impacts. And I will move to introduce our panelists for today. Quickly, we have 5 distinguished professionals within this space, and they will help us understand these. First on my list here is Firmaye Bogale from Ethiopia. That's the Ethiopian Public Health Institute. She has over a decade of experience in the field of public health, having effectively navigated clinical and non-clinical healthcare realms. Her experience encompasses key roles in public healthcare delivery, health program evaluation, public health research, knowledge translation, and EIDM. With a master's degree in public health, she currently works as a researcher at EPHI, focused on EIDM and knowledge translation. She leads and works on a range of initiatives and projects aimed at translating scientific evidence into actions for informed decision-making in healthcare and advancing the EIDM space. Firmaye is also a winner of the 2024 Africa Evidence Leadership Award in the Young and Emerging Leaders category. That's under 35 category. I will proceed to introduce Harsha Dayal, who is with the DPME, that's the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation based in South Africa. She is currently employed as research director at the department since 2012. DPME is one of the center of government departments that has oversight role on the performance of governments in the implementation of the National Development Plan. It has championed evidence-based policymaking since 2006 and has partnered with several organizations nationally and internationally to ensure capability in the public sector to use relevant, timely, and quality evidence. She has a doctorate of philosophy in development studies from the University of Johannesburg. She is a qualified occupational therapist and worked as a public health professional for 14 years. She then migrated to the social sciences during her employment at the HSRC. That's the Human Sciences Research Council. She holds a diploma, cum laude in monitoring evaluation and a master's degree in public health. She undertakes policy research to support the implementation of South Africa's development agenda. During her tenure, she developed various strategies to bridge the gap between researchers and policymakers in brokering data, research, and evaluation evidence for societal impact. I'll proceed to introduce Prof. Vhumani Magezi. He's with, okay, so he holds a PhD in social sciences and several other postgraduate qualifications in international development related fields. Prof is an NRF rated researcher and professor of public practical theology and civil society. He's widely published. He's a founder and director of ACMERET Solutions, a Pan-African consultancy specializing in evaluations, operational and implementation research, program development, implementation and management, monitoring, evaluation, learning and research, development of briefs, documentation, communication and material development, organizational development, capacity assessments and developments, and providing advisory and technical assistance in research and development. He has performed evaluations and research that generate evidence, inform policy and program improvements for multilateral, bilateral, and international organizations, including NGOs and private foundations, including UNESCO, UN WFP, that's the World Food Program, UNICEF, WHO, SADC, the World Bank, Global Fund, amongst others. I will move to introduce Ronald Munatsi. Ronald is with the Zimbabwe Evidence-Informed Policy Network, ZAPNet. Ronald is the director and co-founder of ZAPNet, a non-governmental evidence to policy intermediary organization working to enhance EIDM capacity in Zimbabwe. He has just completed his PhD, whose thesis was using rapid evidence synthesis platforms to institutionalize EIDM in low-resource health systems. He also possesses an MPhil in Library and Information Science, obtained from Aberystwyth University in Wales. Ronald is currently an AEN reference group member. He has 20 years of combined experience in EIDM and knowledge management. He has participated in several EIDM capacity development programs in Zimbabwe and other African countries. His areas of interest are finding what works to improve capacity at the individual, institutional, and systemic levels to guarantee routine generation, synthesis, including responsible and transparent use of high-quality evidence in decision-making. Last but not the least, I will introduce Dr. Justina Ajua Onumah, who works at the CSIR-Science and Technology Policy Research Institute in Ghana. Dr. Onumah is a senior research scientist at the CSIR STEPRI for short in Ghana. Her research focuses on the economics of innovation and development, particularly advising policy directions in the agriculture and enterprise sectors. Her work emphasizes the importance of policy influence and evidence-based decision-making, aligned with her institute's mandate to guide science, technology, and innovation policies. She embeds research to policy actions in her projects, ensuring that research outcomes inform STI policymaking in Ghana. Justina actively organizes and facilitates policy dialogues and develops policy briefs to translate research findings into actionable insights. She also engages with high-level policymakers, including dialogues on political party manifestos on STI, ensuring alignment with national development goals with science as the catalyst. Recently, she evaluated one of government's entrepreneurship support programs, providing recommendations for scaling their impact. Additionally, she is currently involved in policies and programs mapping the food and agriculture sector under an EU-AU partnership framework, aiming to improve evidence-based policymaking in these critical areas. I think that would be it for the introductions. I will want to welcome you all, colleagues, to the discussion. Thank you for making time to join us in this discussion. To set the ground for our discussion, I will want to do this quick description of the evidence ecosystem as we have it at PAX Africa. We've been doing some modeling of this space, and we will want to quickly share what we see in this space just to guide our discussion. So if you can see my screen, I have here this model that we've been working on for some years now, trying to understand how the ecosystem works and the different things that we've been doing. And this kind of fits within our discussion. So within the evidence ecosystem, we have these three broad categories: producers of evidence, intermediaries, and users of evidence. So under each category, there are the different tasks or roles that are undertaken within each to ensure that their works are conducted. And so this is basically going to frame our conversation in here. So our panelists, fortunately for us, quite deliberately selected as well, represents these three, collectively represent these three subsystems within our ecosystem. So colleagues, you are welcome. And just the first sort of understanding from you, I would want to invite you individually to share your reflections on this. Do you think it describes the work Justina?
Yes, Kirchuffs. I don't know whether the connection issue is from my
reflection
end
with us.
or I'm not. Can everybody hear me? Because I was experiencing a break, so I'm not sure whether it's from Kirchuffs' end or it's from my end.
We can hear you. I think Kirchuffs is the one
I
that
can
is
hear you
breaking.
now, so yeah.
Okay, so Kirchuffs, you might
Okay.
have to come back with a question because I think you were breaking along the line, so that I can get you properly.
Okay. Sure. So I wanted you to give your initial reflection on this modeling, particularly within the producer space, but other, subsectors as well that you have some experience of. You think this is reflective in terms of the roles that you do play or the activities you engage in as a producer of evidence, as an intermediary, and then as a user sometimes?
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation, first and
But primarily
foremost.
as a producer, obviously.
Yes, yes, I'm your first. I'll talk broadly on the producer side. So as a researcher within this ecosystem, with the roles that I've seen, I think it's more or less captures the roles that we play as evidence producers in this ecosystem. But as I was discussing with somebody somewhere last week, for a producer, I don't think your role as an evidence producer really ends there. You need to have some element of the intermediary, because you produce the evidence, you go through that rigorous process, you understand the evidence generation process better. And before you even go ahead to even generate the evidence, you would have done some kind of pre-engagement and then kind of trying to have a demand-driven focus towards your evidence generation, because you don't want to generate an evidence where it will not be used by the user. So for me, the producer understands the evidence generation process much better. So in terms of aligning it with the end user, you might, for a producer, you still need to have some element of communication. Very, very important. Because if, assuming there are no intermediaries within your organization, just like we have here at the CSIR STEPRI, we don't have clear cut-off rules that this researcher is responsible for communicating the evidence. This one is responsible for generating. We are all generating and we will all kind of communicate the research evidence. So in as much as these rules that you have spelled out, and I'm happy that there is that kind of linkages between the three ecosystem actors, because honestly, we do not stand alone. You would understand that for the evidence user, probably at the extreme end, where they would have is to have some capacity to understand and to use the evidence. But for them, generation is not really their sorry, you need to have those roles and as well as have some element of science communication, because without that, it will be very difficult, especially if you don't have an intermediary, like somebody who is responsible for that. So for an evidence producer, those roles, the roles of generating the evidence engagement is very, very critical. But what is also most critical is your communication and how you even package the evidence to the intermediary or even to the end user at the end of the day. Yeah, so that's my initial reflection on this ecosystem.
Thank you very much, Justina, for that. I would come to you, Harsha, and then I would move to Prof. No, so from Harsha, I would go to Ronald, for Prof. So Harsha, if you want to share your own reflections as well. So.
Okay, thank you very much. You can hear me as well? Okay, yeah.
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Thanks.
And thank you for bringing the model back on, because I was going to ask you to put the model very nicely up again. I completely agree with what Justina also entered into the space to have all three actors of the producers, intermediaries, and users in this conversation and in this dialogue. I am literally going to cut to the chase to say that I know I'm coming in as the user perspective, and I will bring that part in, but like Justina as well, there are components of intermediary functions that you always play over and above getting into the getting evidence into the policy space. So because I am positioned as a researcher, but research support in one of the policymaking departments, we find that the EIDM processes are conceptually understood. Everyone agrees on how and why evidence needs to be factored into the decision-making processes. And we've also got very clear, processes around bringing the evidence into the policy cycle. So policy cycle being, where you don't have a clear agenda, but then you need the evidence on that agenda to put that as a point of contention. That brings in different types of evidence, right? So it's diagnostic type of evidence, and we depend on the scientific world, and this is where the producers, and we link up very well with the producers on that side of it. We have very little evidence that comes forward with the options available as to which direction you would take in a policy direction, right? So before planning, and then you get into the kind of processes around stakeholder management and getting the different areas of policy actors build consensus around that policy space. But now here comes the evidence, accessibility issue, and you see acquisition and access being right up front. Now, I think scientific evidence is very well structured in searchable, discoverable platforms. And we even can get access to that through our partners and networks and through our intermediaries here. But where we find that the whole big category of gray literature, and this is literature that is made accessible through websites, through think tanks that are not publishing in, peer-reviewed journal articles, and even government outputs that they have commissioned out and all of that. Those processes, those are not neatly and easily accessible through searchable platforms. And what we found then is that some of those processes fall on the wayside or lags behind when scientific literature is much more accessible and easily accessible. So I think sourcing of gray literature for us, and that is, practice-based knowledge and evidence generated by service points on the ground, including then government point services. And then the big area of processes that we find in terms of actioning and evaluation of results is really to do with the program level evidence. Now you have a lot of interventions in place right across the board from different sectors as well. And as users, it's a combination of different types of evidence and different sources of evidence. Now, what do I mean by that? And I think this is what we have been working through quite a long time to be able to understand that scientific evidence produces some type of very critical, what is the problem area and how can we best overcome that. But program evidence is about what works for who, in what conditions, and that is often found in grey literature. So I just want to reiterate the partnerships with intermediaries and those producers, and what Justina has also said, that to link up with users upfront rather than produce evidence and then try to still translate it and make it accessible downstream for the users at the end. So let me stop there, Kirchuffs, and tell you that basically there's a lot to unpack, and thank you for this session as well.
All right, thank you very much, Harsha. So indirectly, we've seen okay, I think let me pick your thoughts, Ronald. I think that helps us take the different sides. Ronald, you may want to come in now quickly, your own reflections.
Okay, thank you very much, Kirchuffs. And I really like how the two presenters, kickstarted this. There's a lot of evidence to support the critical role processes play in the evidence ecosystem. But I believe there's still a gap in terms of how these processes become integrated into institutional frameworks, particularly in view of the intricacy of the decision-making process and also the contentious nature of evidence. So as evidence brokers, I think I won't go much on the individual processes in terms of the various players in the mix. But my perceptions will revolve more into how to integrate these into a coherent framework. And I'll focus also mostly on policymaking institutions, because that's where most of my experience lies. I just want to highlight that when we're talking of these processes, they entail some form of guidelines and procedures designed to improve EIDM. So legitimacy becomes a very critical role, especially when we want to embed these processes in policymaking institutions, and also try to engage with the other various players. Of course, for example, the model that we've shown, it shows a very neat, model, but in practice, it's a bit messier than that. So, and we're also seeing most of the knowledge brokering being done by civic society organizations, who sometimes lack appreciation of some of the internal structures, norms, and values of these decision-making, institutions. So I think it is important as we are looking at some of the interventions to enhance EIDM, to note that all organizations can be learning organizations and can obviously adopt new practices, norms, and values. But it's also important to appreciate the internal institutional, variables that exist in these policymaking institutions. And there are various approaches that are being utilized to enhance or to develop capacity across, individual, institutional, and wider ecosystem level processes. But you find that, for example, the rapid evidence synthesis platforms is an approach that is being talked about a lot, but its interpretation and conceptualization, there are still gaps in that. Even while I agree that processes must be contextualized on local priorities, I think these approaches that we are trying to design need to be broadly conceptualized and somewhat harmonized to facilitate their integration and institutionalization. And in our work as knowledge brokers, we've identified, some gaps across, which I can broadly liken to, for example, the need for a virtual or physical coordinating entity in policymaking institutions, for example, how the evidence queries become routine and how they are also framed. Because if you look at policymakers, sometimes their research questions may not necessarily be the evidence that they are actually looking for. So there need to be processes to also try to streamline this and come up with real research questions, because especially when you're looking at some nested causal effect kind of policy issues. And then the institutional processes themselves of timely generating, synthesizing, and communicating this evidence, and also obtain feedback such that it becomes more like a continuum. Also gaps around systematic stakeholder engagement in terms of mapping the stakeholders themselves, and also how to synthesize the evidence obtained. I mean, in light of what Harsha has said, because people assume that stakeholders usually reach consensus, but it's not always like that, because different stakeholders may also have different interests, and it's important to have processes to be able to harmonize that. So I think if some of these gaps are addressed, it becomes easier to embed, evidence decision-making practices in policy-making institutions, and also align them with other important factors, like your skills, attitudes, high-level support, building networks, and so forth, and of course the related political and other interests. I think I'll also stop there for now. Thanks, Kirchuffs.
All right, thank you very much, Ronald, for these reflections. I think you touched a bit into some gaps that we need to look at as well. So I'll move on that note to Prof. I want you to come in to help us if there are some other gaps, particularly in the individual processes or tasks that we undertake within the ecosystem. Are there some processes where you think capacity development intervention should target? Prof. And then afterwards, Firmaye, you may also come in to help with that. Yes, Prof.
Okay, thank you. I want to link up a bit with what Ronald just said, and also my previous colleagues. I think the first one is that the model that you're presenting, the typology, is simplistic in real life. So you need to develop a much more integrated way of thinking of evidence, both in terms of generation, use, and the intermediaries who play. So that will be my first remark. In terms of the messiness, that's the word used, that it's quite messy. Let me give you a specific example. You have an interplay of a knowledge or evidence producer who is also a user, who is also somewhat a broker as well. Let me use a specific example of the work that I have just finished for one organization. It's a gender organization working across Africa. They fund the gender research activities, and they generate this evidence, and they use it to develop and strengthen the programs, and also for their advocacy and engagement with the government. And they fund this from the institutional funds. They deliberately raise funds to specifically fund such initiatives. So in real life, sometimes it can be really integrated. So in your thinking of evidence generation, you need to be very clear about that these are intertwined and integrated. Okay, right. That would be my second remark. My third remark is that you need to think of evidence in terms of for who and for what, because evidence and knowledge and information is not neutral. Whoever funds and generates provide resources tends to influence what goes in there and so forth. I have done work where at the inception phase, you're told, I don't think we like this question, right? Because it may unravel certain things. So we also have to be very alert to the simplistic thinking that knowledge generation or evidence is neutral, is evidence for who and for what, which then leads to my fourth remark of utility. It takes us to utility. What is the use of this evidence? Is it for compliance? Is it for learning? Is it for decision? Or is it just for ticking boxes? So we need to be very clear and alert to these realities. And then, of course, my friend spoke about the accessibility of such evidence as well. He spoke about gray literature and so forth and so on. But let me end here that firstly, the simplicity of your model may be misleading in terms of real life evidence generation use and players as in intermediaries. You need to recognize the messiness of it in real life, especially taking cognizance of the complexity of evidence and the users is for who, for what purpose. Let me end here.
Sure. Thank you very much, Prof, for these reflections and very rightly acknowledged, I think, by different panelists that it's quite complicated, quite chaotic, much more than what is shared here. But our focus is a simplistic view, trying to touch more on the specific kind of tasks and processes that we engage in within the ecosystem. So Firmaye, you may want to come in and see if there are some of these specific processes that you think might require some strengthening in particular ecosystems in your particular experience. It could be in country or in a project, or there's some specific processes that you think will require some more strengthening within our ecosystems. Firmaye.
Yes, thank you, Kirchuffs. I hope you can hear me. I've been dropping off a little. But so I'm not going to go into the specific processes because I think Ronald has explained them very well. So I'll just focus on some of the capacity building or the gaps that I think would really help out. So I think, especially in the current day and age that we're in, I think we need a constant sort of capacity building or awareness creation around what evidence is. Because I'm saying this, especially if you look at it now, we have this new era of AI, and just as an indication, and the concept that we used to understand what evidence is and what evidence-informed decision-making is really dynamic, and really needs sort of a continuous capacity building that goes into creating this understanding and common understanding and consensus of what EIDM really means and evidence really means for the different contexts that we're working in. And I would really also want to emphasize on the access that have been mentioned a couple of times now, because I think, as mentioned earlier, especially as looking at it from an intermediary point of view, it is one of the critical things that would really push you to provide a very practicable and context-specific solution. And for that, we really need access to the different evidence out there. And this also goes into not only the high quality, in quotation, and the research outputs, but also talking about gray literatures. And now we're also talking about indigenous ways of knowing. So the aspect of access really plays in here. And I don't think it is at a level that we can say that it is equitable. So I think that is one of the areas that we should really work towards in building capacity and providing that access at the same time. And I think from the model that you have also put, there are a couple of things that really sort of resonated with me, including, reproducibility of what we are producing and at the same time funding. which are really critical for us to work between researchers and also decision makers and trying to be that bridge. But one of the things that really hinders the impact that we want to impose on decision making and making a change at the societal level is us working as a silo, right? We have this multiple silos that are working on some of the common things that we can sort of indicate to, but at the same time not having that capacity of collaboration and communication. So I think that soft skill should really be emphasized on, and that is something that we should really work into capacity building. And I think earlier when Dayal was discussing about the different steps, one of the things that came out was to do around stakeholder engagement. And I think that's also something that we should work towards, and what that really means when we're talking about community engagement, decision maker engagement, and user engagement, and trying to sort of embed this thought of evidence informed decision making at the different levels. So of course there are a couple of other decision making, capacity building spaces that I can think of, but I would love to sort of emphasize on understanding and creating common awareness around evidence and EIDM, and also emphasizing on access in alignment with creating that collaborative and communication space and building capacity around that. I'll stop here. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Firmaye, for that. So briefly, shortly I'll be coming to the audience for their own views on some of these issues that have come through, particularly on the processes that we engage in for delivering the evidence, generating the evidence, making use of the evidence, and then all these different things that we do in between. But still, with our panelists, just quickly, maybe I would start from you, Harsha, and then I would come to Prof, and then I go to Justina. You may want to share some implications of some of the capacity development interventions that you have seen in your practice. What are some of the implications that we have seen coming from the capacity development efforts that have gone into specific processes that we've sought to strengthen? What are some of the outcomes that we are observing? I'm not sure if you're getting the question right. So we've been doing some capacity strengthening works within the ecosystem on specific tasks and processes, communicating the research and the evidence, accessing these and many of these things that we do. What are some emerging outcomes that you're observing? Or what are the outcomes that you think we should be?
I think No, so thank you, Kirchuffs. I think that's a critical question, but it seems like it's also difficult to put the question forward because it's so convoluted in a way. And I want to reiterate something before I also answer that, attempt to answer the question. My experience and over these years is that we shouldn't fall into the trap of identifying gaps and then building a capacity intervention just to address that single gap. And I think that's what you mentioned when you said, filling the gaps and trying to get into that part of, okay, let's meet that and fill that gap with a capacity constraint. Because that as you are in this, whatever category it is, whether you are the user, the producer, the intermediary, now that you become more evidence informed and you use the principles that we in AEN are now becoming more accustomed to, you start to appreciate the needs of the other role players or the actors. So if I'm in the user space, it gets quite messy, and I like the word messy because it is that in practice. that Vhumani had mentioned, that if you start straddling across these different actors, you appreciate what is happening. You appreciate why production takes that long, or why it's needed in terms of quality. The producers will appreciate better, because of our relationships, why policy making in itself is messy. And then the difficult task of intermediaries, because we all start to fill that gap by actually going outside of our silos and becoming that little gray area, right? So if that's the case, I think that the EIDM processes and moving in the direction of better outcomes through capacity building must address those areas of not just people and their needs, but how do we capacitate over the long term a system that gets put in place, that you don't need someone to come in, run a workshop, but you're building this capacity because the value chain is improving. Now that I know how to do this, my need becomes that next, and the next thing becomes another need, because I'm growing. And I think with growth and with the fact that you are, the capacity at the point of the foundational needs was met, but you know that this is going to be the next need and the next need. So let's try to build systems that will help users and producers and intermediaries to become better in that role, but also to build towards evidence informed decision making. Now, I think the messiness and the practicalities and the learning curves will never be overcome. We need to still keep that human face there, but can we go to a little bit more of a forecasting that this is what's going to be needed next? So we have that in place. And I think with Firmaye putting giving us the reality check of the AI age, it can be the next process. So let me end there, because for me, it really becomes a growth point. And I think the messiness is because we keep growing, right? And I think this is, for me, the aspect of capacity building that must be, or capacity development that must be taken into consideration. Thank you very much.
That's quite quite instructive. The need to look out for growth, kind of holistic growth in our capacity development efforts. Prof, do you want to proceed with some of the outcomes that you anticipate, or you have actually witnessed from some of the capacity development efforts that we have undertaken within our ecosystems?
Yes, let me, again, the outcomes in my experience are always intertwined with I think, processes of generating the evidence. So let me just throw in a couple of things very quickly. The first one is we need to understand the importance of decolonization of evidence. I know it may not mean much, does not make sense. Let me give you a specific example. In decolonization of evidence that we generate, we have to understand that sometimes what you find at grassroots, on the ground, in communities, in terms of evidence that you require, may take you 2, 3, 4 years to really realize why people are rejecting boreholes for a very long time. Whilst from a positivistic side, the donor, for example, the funder, wants you to sink boreholes. They want to know how many boreholes have been sunk. So what has been very clear in our engagements and the capacity building, especially with implementers and organizations, is asking critical questions. Why are people resisting? And then when you ask that question, I think it was Ronald who spoke about the questions. Then you generate information and you use that information to educate the funder as well. So it's a two-way process. That's why we said earlier on, it's quite integrated. So that's one. We need to understand that process very clearly. Then the second one, from our experience, is intentionality of evidence generation. We need to be very, very intentional that whatever we are doing in a social program, even in a conversation like this, what is it that we want to get out of it? What is the result of it? What is the evidence that this has been a success? So building that question, maybe even before we started this, is very, very important. Building baseline, process assessment, and end line is very, very important to generate, I think, effective evidence. This is what we have found out. Where there's been intentionality, the evidence has been very useful and it has been able to be used. Then I think my colleague who spoke earlier on spoke about capacity building. I think capacity building has really have become quite, it has always been, but capacity building as in development has really been a key issue to strengthen evidence generation. It has become a scarce skill. Just to give you an example, within the UN system, they've introduced a meta evaluation of reports that are written about the generation of evidence that has been generated. It's because sometimes the generated evidence is sometimes skewed, is not accurate. So capacity enhancement has become really critical as well as an ongoing. I think another colleague spoke about the AI, the rise of data science, how to effectively optimize that. So understanding the value of evidence as well within the organization so that we put a price tag on it so that people value it is very important. So I would say decolonization has really emerged quite strongly as an outcome of the evidence processes, intentionality, the importance of capacity building, and value of data. If you have information, you have money. Thank you.
All right. That's quite useful listening to those. Let me come to you, Ronald. Ronald, if you want to help us from an intermediary perspective of an organization that has developed capacities for some time now, what have you observed as emerging outcomes from your interventions, and what else would you want to see as we seek to strengthen our, processes for EIDM, for the ecosystem?
Yeah, thank you, Kirchuffs. From our experience, I think the issue is most of the capacity development has not been thinking through how processes will be integrated, when building capacities at these various levels, individual, institutional, and systemic. And I think I would like to reiterate that as well, because I think what has been lacking was in developing some of these approaches, there's not been some deliberate integration of both institutional theories and also knowledge translation theoretical frameworks in designing some of these interventions. For example, a lot of capacity development programs have been focusing more on cognitive level kind of capacities. For example, your skills, how to synthesize evidence, how to develop policy briefs, and so forth. But in terms of ensuring that these are embedded into institutional processes, we have noticed gaps there. So and the issue of power imbalances as well. I think it's a very critical issue that the prof is talked about. In that there hasn't been a deliberate effort to understand the existing structures and also the existing processes, so that interventions sort of build upon, and they are not like isolated, as Harsha has said, where you end up developing, these siloed capacities, and then you end up realizing that there are gaps in the various spaces in the ecosystem, for example, in stakeholder engagement, and so forth. So I think building on existing systems, such as those that are already established, the current knowledge systems within the policymaking institutions, for example, and also align with some of the existing policy and legal frameworks, I'm sure it will provide a solid foundation for institutionalizing some of these processes, of course, basing on what is worked elsewhere. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ronald. We need to look at the multi-level outcomes as we seek to strengthen capacity. So I'll switch now to the audience and see if somebody, so far my checks in the chat box, there is no question as yet, but at this point, if somebody has any question or contribution, perhaps just raise your hand. We are able to acknowledge you. You open your mic and then you share with us. Yeah, just as we're doing that, just a few seconds. If we don't see any hand, then we might as well proceed. As we are waiting for the audience, Firmaye, I will be coming to you and then going to Justina for your own views on the manifesto itself. With all these discussions that we are holding, what does this mean for the manifesto itself as we are seeking to revise it? What should we keep in mind, right, from all these discussions of the processes, the different principles that we need to observe and all that? What do all these mean for the document itself, the manifesto, as we're seeking to revise it? So I'll come to you, Firmaye, and then to you, Justina. But I see no hand still from our audience. All right. On that note, I think I will proceed. Firmaye, just talk to us.
Yeah. Thank you, Kirchuffs. So I will start by saying, having these kinds of conversations is really, really critical. And so it really helps us to sort of shape the shared vision to the shared vision that we are, sort of trying to emanate on the manifesto at the same time, and sort of helps us to bring the different perspectives, be it from, researchers, intermediaries, or the different players that are in this specific space. And I think it plays majorly into creating this understanding of the different contexts that we come from. I'm saying this because we are, in this very unique continent where we come from, and the different sectors and the different geographic locations really shapes how we understand, and also how we sort of impact the EIDM space, and also how we understand the capacity development and the needs around it. And I think this kinds of conversations ultimately sort of come in very handy to see how the specific objectives that we have put in the manifesto and the principles that we have put in the manifesto really aligns with the overall vision that we have, which is sort of bringing out EIDM at a very institutionalized level. Of course, we have to sort of unpack what institutionalization for EIDM is really, and these kinds of conversations really sort of direct us towards sort of creating a common understanding and a common interpretation of what we have put in the manifesto. And I think especially for the community that is working on EIDM in Africa, and also the AEN community at the same time, really helps us to sort of see what is happening and where, and also identify the different resources that we can use, and also use this manifesto as a guiding or a guidance, and also sort of provides us an opportunity to sort of shape the manifesto at the same time, and not only with the speakers, but also the different participants that we have. They have the opportunity, and we have the opportunity to sort of shape what we want out of this manifesto. And I think just to sort of bring them together, I think it's about shaping our understanding and creating that common understanding of what we mean and what the objective of this is, and also sort of direct where we want this capacity development and the different principles and the contents should really be. So I think it facilitates a sort of a ground for us to contribute and also understand what we have within the specific manifesto. And for the team also trying to sort of, update this, it helps as media that helps to sort of grasp what is being discussed and what is happening out there, and to shape it to the real needs of the end users at the end of the day. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very, very valuable. Highlighting in there of some implications of these for the manifesto documents. I want to acknowledge Eric Engang's contribution in the chat box that Prof mentioned decolonization, and you think it should go hand in hand with localization in the EIDM ecosystem to contribute towards aligning the evidence generated out of a given context to local needs. I think that really is something that we need to look out for. I think it's still captured in the manifesto, so as we're revising, we make sure that we don't miss that element in there. Thank you very much, Eric, for that. Justina, let's hear you out as well. How does all this tie in with the manifesto documents? How do we take these forward?
Kirchuffs, thank you so much for the brilliant discussion that have been going on. Before I come to respond to this question, Prof actually mentioned something that really caught my attention when we were talking about the capacity development outcomes and then the processes and what we need to be looking out for. And then he mentioned something about intentionality, the intentionality of the EIDM process itself. How intentional are evidence generators to influence policy, which is very, very important? How do we even generate our evidence in the first place? Is it demand driven or supply push? Because most of the time, what we seek to do is once we've gone for our grants, and then there is this EIDM component, we kind of want to force the evidence acceptance down the throats of the evidence user. But then if we are very intentional about the fact that we want to cause a change, a certain policy reform in a certain social program that the government has enacted, the most important point is that as evidence generators or evidence actors in the ecosystem, it's really to engage. And this bring me back to the point where the capacities that we are seeking to really build should be capacities for pre-evidence and post-evidence. So the pre-evidence capacities are what you want to kind of pre-engage the user in the first, because in the end, as producers, whatever you produce, if it's not adopted, if it is not used, I mean, it's as useless as not even producing anything. It just go down the drain, and then it kind of checking the box for our academic purposes. And we don't really want to always be seen as we are just checking the box for our promotions. We are just checking the box for academic. Somebody will say this data collection exercise is just an academic exercise. It is not just an academic exercise. You want to influence a change. So the capacity building really should be focusing on even how you begin the evidence generation before you start. The target group that you are targeting, have you engaged them? Is the process being demand driven? Is it being co-created? Because really in our experience, the kind of efforts that have yielded much outcomes are really the ones that are co-generated and co-created with the end user. Because when you begin to do that, then they accept whatever outcome that comes from the process because they have been there and they are demanding it. So I really want us to really hash the point of intentionality so hard, even within our manifesto as certain. Now, coming back to the manifesto, going through the manifesto, you realize that the manifesto really touches like very well on all the things that as capacity efforts in the EIDM space, we should be paying attention to. Very brilliantly delivered, which I will also go along with Firmaye's point that it's up to us to begin these kind of conversations further and more and see how we could actually make the manifesto not just a blueprint, but then an actionable document and a living document that we can. One of the points that the manifesto really stresses on is trying to encourage like focusing on existing capacities. So there was a time that we were trying to develop a concept note to a funder. Then I was here trying to say that we will link up with institution A, B, and C to build our capacity. Now we go to a conference, and one of the institutions that I had in mind that they could build our capacity in a certain area had an interaction with a colleague from my institute. And it is all within this evidence synthesis and then this kind of space. And this institution is now inviting my colleague to their institution to build their capacity. So then I begin to realize that we have internal capacity that we have not really fully exploited. So it's up to what the institution is, probably the AEN with them. And I really like that point in the manifesto where it's not just about new capacities or bringing in external, but like looking within our internal systems and structures to see where we could actually complement our individual effort. And capacity building really should not be an individual base. It should be systemic, because people live in institutions, right? So if you begin to build capacities with just a single individual, when they leave that institution, it's gone forever. So if you begin to focus capacity building as a systemic action, to empower the entire institution, it will help instead of focusing on individual capacity buildings. And then lastly, also on the manifesto, I would also really want to see how probably AEN could actually lead the advocacy process in terms of embedding EIDM curriculums in postgraduate education. I'm saying this because I had an opportunity to give a guest lecture at one of the chairs in the University of Johannesburg, and it was in EIDM. And to be surprised, it will surprise you to know that not all of them have even heard EIDM. And these are research students who are coming out, like these are PhD and master students. They are research-based projects. It means that when they come out, they're supposed to influence a certain process, and yet they do not know what EIDM is. So probably we could kind of channel some of our effort and interaction within that, try to advocate and creating actions for like integrating EIDM into, especially for postgraduate curriculums, that would really help. And then it's all part of the capacity building approach that we seek to achieve as AEM. Thank you.
That is very instructive, Justina, there on the way forward. And I think on the latter point you make, the Africa Evidence Youth League, I understand, has been doing some works to that in that area. But I'm like you rightly mentioned, we need to look at the postgraduate programs because these are the levels that most development partners, governments, would want to rely on. So these are more direct, influencers of policy. So we need to strengthen that area. So it's a challenge to the network, that's all of us, to see how we can work in some of these capacity strengthening efforts. So lots of key words have come from this discussion today. I'm very much challenged by these discussions. I see the desire for deliberateness, the need to go, across levels, the need for us to look at system-wide interventions, deliberateness, and all these different keywords that came up in the discussions. We need to look at how to strengthen all of these things within the manifesto, and then the use of the manifesto itself, as colleagues on the panel have had to look at this document. If you have not had a look at the manifesto, it's time you pick it up, at least have a look at the current version, and then colleagues within the Secretariat will put together, the process to work towards the revised version. And it would have contributed to that document that we own and we use. On that note, I would want to invite Sidziwe to bring us to a close as the driver of the program today. Thank you, Sidziwe.
Thank you very much, Kirchuffs and all our panelists. It's been a great discussion. Just before I close, for Charity's sake, can I have all the panelists and you, Kirchuffs, your cameras on so that Charity can take a screenshot? Ronald, we're waiting for you. Great. Charity? Let me know when we are good. Thank you very much, everyone. Just in closing, I think we really appreciate how much you supported the process of building the manifesto until this far. So I think in closing, we're saying that we're going to put together this recording and also a blog to summarize these amazing discussions that we've had. And we've also begun processes of updating the manifesto so that we can be able to publish it again and share with all our membership to look at the new version of the manifesto. So we're looking forward to that as well. So we really appreciate, there's been so many webinar sessions that we've hosted for the past 4 years, and it has been insightful. The support has been amazing, and the AEN is taking the challenge, as Justina was saying, to say, how do we take some of these things forward to make sure that collectively, as the AEN membership, we do something to make a difference. So I'm really excited to see how this is going and where it's going. So I appreciate all of the speakers that joined us. Thank you very much, Kesha, for driving these discussions. So thank you also all the participants for joining us as well and taking time to engage with these discussions. So thank you very much, everyone. I'm closing the webinar. So thank you very much. We appreciate your contribution and support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Zoe, I think someone was asking if they can also send their comments on the manifesto.
Please, you are welcome. So we'll send out social media processes and people can comment as well.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
So the discussion doesn't end here. I think when the post will be made on LinkedIn, right, Charity?
Yes.
Then we can continue with the discussions.
Conversation.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.